Welcome to Special News Channel. Russia's war in Ukraine has caused problems that they will deal with for many years. Putin sees the wounds that are irreparable, both militarily and economically, open. But his stubbornness about Ukraine and his desire to continue this war continues. For this reason, Russian leader Vladimir Putin, who wanted to minimize his losses, became the icon of the unloved and even hated man due to the mobilization decision he announced in his country. Russian citizens, unable to withstand Vladimir Putin's power built on oppression and fear, are either leaving Russia, mutilating themselves, or killing themselves. Yes, you heard right. Russian citizens even commit suicide to avoid being sent to fight in Ukraine. In Russia, where the death rate has increased, the local people do not want to be the toys of Putin and the Kremlin administration. The fact that a country leader humiliates his people so much is criticized by all the states of the world. Russian leader Vladimir Putin is officially compared to former Russian leader Stalin for not listening to any opposing views or voices against him regarding the war in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin, who established a strict regime in Russia at least as much as the Stalin administration, continues to inflict the greatest damage to Russia in its history due to the radical and risky decisions he took. The Russian economy has now collapsed with the mobilization decision announced by Putin. Thousands of Russian billionaires renounced their citizenship and stopped supporting Russia. The socio-economic conditions of Russian citizens saw their lowest levels. Vladimir Putin, on the other hand, preferred to drag Russia deeper into the swamp it was in. The fact that the number of 300,000 volunteer citizens planned to be included in the Russian army with the mobilization decision will now be increased to 1 million or more, with the statements made by the Russian Defense Ministry, led to a change in the balances in Russia. While the local people of Russia were willing to leave, even when the number of mobilization was 300,000, now, with the possibility that this number may reach millions, there's almost no one left on the Russian streets. Even if the mobilization seems to have come to an end for now, the fact that this mobilization did not work shows that the possibility of a new mobilization is always high. The shock decision of the Moscow administration about the Russian citizens fleeing the mobilization turned the agenda upside down. The authorities of the Moscow administration decided to install facial recognition programs on the systems of security cameras located on all streets of the Russian Federation. In this way, Russian citizens fleeing this mobilization will be able to be detected and caught by security cameras on the streets of Russia. The Moscow administration immediately started work on this application and prepared a huge data system for the facial recognition program. Oksana Yakimyuk, general designer of the Moscow video surveillance system, stated that it's technically possible to exchange reverse data from the capital Moscow to other regions. Thus, Russian citizens will be on their toes not only in the capital, but also in every region of Russia where there are security cameras. The number of volunteer citizens to be recruited into the Russian army is expected to increase as security measures and mobilization practices have increased so much in Russia. Because it looks like Russian leader Vladimir Putin has blocked all escape routes, and it is estimated that in the future, even the Russian border gates may be closed to all entrances and exits. The reaction of the local people is growing because of this tracking system created in Russia. Russian citizens now want the bloody occupation movement in Ukraine to end and the oppressive regime of Russian leader Vladimir Putin to end. This is not the only problem. The law signed today created a great uneasiness in the Russian army, even though Putin's mobilization decision was harshly criticized. Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a law providing for the conscription for mobilization of citizens with definitely void or extraordinary convictions for murder, robbery, theft, drug trafficking, and other serious crimes under the criminal code of the Russian Federation. This makes it possible to mobilize hundreds of thousands of people sentenced to probation or recently released from colonies that were previously banned from serving. The only group of offenders exempted from the decree are those who have committed minor sexual offenses, treason, espionage, or terrorism. Also excluded are those convicted of attempted assassination of a government official, hijacking, extremist activities, and illegal use of nuclear materials and radioactive materials. President Vladimir Putin said on Friday that the Kremlin has mobilized 18,000 more soldiers from Russia's general male population, above its target of 300,000, to fight in its war in Ukraine. This is another proof that the size of the event we just mentioned is increasing day by day. As Vladimir Putin sees that the soldiers he sent to Ukraine are insufficient, he sends new recruits to replace them. In fact, these Russian recruits are being used as live targets for Ukrainian bullets. Earlier this week, Russia's Ministry of Defense announced the suspension of all partial mobilization activities, including subpoena deliveries, after officials said the draft target of employing 300,000 personnel had been met. But Putin's partial mobilization order will end only when the Russian president signs an official decree. Until then, it reserves the right to enlist more people. The head of Russia's notorious Wagner forces, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has apparently summoned prisoners from Russian prisons to join the mercenary group in the Kremlin's war in Ukraine. The amendments signed by Putin have nothing to do with the so-called recruitment. Instead, the law applies to prisoners who are conditionally sentenced or released from the colonies. These people usually have to remain under the supervision of the authorities for 8 to 10 years until the conviction is overturned. They are not allowed to leave their place of residence and must comply with various restrictions. Disappointment caused by Russia's lack of progress in Ukraine is also visible in the Russian media. State television generally supports the Russian government, and while broadcasters are still reluctant to question Putin, the Russian military is coming under increasing scrutiny. Wagner leader Prigozhin says Moscow must now be fully involved in the war and act ruthlessly. Unlike a mercenary group manager, he couldn't be expected to make a statement. However, Vladimir Putin has been taking the Wagner leader's statements very seriously lately. Russian troops do not have enough manpower to stop enemy attacks. The last Russian losses are directly connected with this. This is a very difficult time for the Russian military on the front lines right now. Military experts also say that Ukrainian forces are at high altitude and have a numerical advantage. They have no issues with the intelligence data or high-precision weapons they constantly use. The armed forces of Ukraine are just waiting for the right moment and destroy the Russian army. All of these issues resonate greatly in the Kremlin. Recently, the Kremlin has been walking a tightrope. Mobilization is not widely held in Russia, and all talk about continued and additional mobilization in the controlled information space is prohibited. Several senior officials want the war to end as Putin's ambitions are deemed unrealistic. This means that a new political crisis can arise at any time. A political fire in Moscow will burn Vladimir Putin first.